Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari.
the foundational ones. And we'll draw a straight line from those events to the persecution of thinkers and activists today. And then we'll see how the bedrock of human morality, far from needing a divine command, is actually much more stable than most of us are led to believe.
It's a story about the danger of words, but also the power of reason.
And that history isn't just background noise. It's the legal and social precedent that fuels everything happening now. To get why Nushuz's work is so critical, we have to start there, with the pattern built on the fear of words.
Let's start at the beginning then. In a place called Yathrib, around 622 CE, Nushuz describes it as this vibrant, almost chaotic marketplace of voices. What did that actually look like?
Well, you have to picture a place that was multi-ethnic, multi-religious, a place where, debate was just the norm. And poets. Poets were not just entertainers.
They were more than that.
Oh, much more. They were the record keepers, the political commentators, the propagandists. A poet could stand up in the market and just, completely demolish a rival's reputation with a few lines of verse.
And the worst that would happen is what? A bad review.
Maybe a rotten date thrown at them.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the culture. It was built on open argument, on satire. Even when Muhammad and his followers arrived from Mecca, it took days of arguments between the tribes to hash out a covenant. Speech was central.
So competitive speech was the norm. Criticism was part of the political game. What was the single event that flipped the switch, that made words a capital crime?
It's pinned down to one specific moment, the Battle of Badr in March 624 CE.
Okay.
Muhammad leads about 300 men in a raid against a much larger force from Mecca, and they win. They win a spectacular, improbable victory.
And how they won is key, right?
It's everything. The prevailing narrative, the one that gets preserved in the foundational texts, is that it wasn't just good tactics, it was divine intervention. Angels fought on their side.
So they returned to Yathrib with more than just prisoners and spoils.
They return with proof, or what they see as undeniable proof, that their God is the winning God, that he fought for them directly. And that victory, that single event, it just radically changes the power dynamic in the city.
Which is when Yathrib becomes Medina.
Exactly. It's no longer just a place, Yathrib. It becomes Medina, which literally means the city. The implication is that it's the only city that matters now. The one true political and spiritual center.
And Nushuz points out that the revelations themselves, the verses of the Quran, they start to change in tone.
They shift dramatically. The earlier verses from Mecca often spoke of tolerance, of debate. After bed, the focus intensifies, it turns inward. Suddenly, the community is obsessed with identifying enemies within.
Hypocrites.
Hypocrites, yes. People who pay lip service but aren't true believers. The verses become about spreading corruption, about dissent, and about the severe punishments for those who cause it. That open marketplace of ideas, it suddenly seems very, very dangerous to the new leadership.
And this transition from satire to sanctioned murder was shockingly fast. Nushuz says the pattern begins just 2 weeks after Badr. How did it start?
It starts with a question, a very simple, chilling question that the prophet puts to his companions. Who will deal with this rascal for me?
Not a trial, not a debate, a delegation of violence.
An immediate delegation of violence and completely bypassing any kind of community process.
And the first victim was a man named Abu Afak. What was his crime?
His crime was poetry. He was an elderly Jewish poet. Some sources say he was over 100 years old. And he wrote verses questioning the battle. He basically asked, why all this killing? When did the refugee who came to us for protection become a warlord?
He was doing what poets in that culture had always done. He was offering political commentary.
Exactly. Traditional political satire. But the response was anything but traditional.
No.
A man named Salim ibn Umayr volunteered.
Yeah.
He went to Abu Afak's home at night and murdered him in his sleep. And Nushuz really hammers this point home. No trial, no counsel, no debate.
Just an assassination.
An assassination that was praised by the prophet the next morning. A simple, good job. And that single act, that applauded murder for words, that's the beginning of a pattern that has, as Nushuz argues, tragically persisted for 14 centuries.
But the killing didn't create total silence, at least not at first. Which brings us to the next case. Asma bint Marwan.
She was poetess and a mother of 5. And she was by all accounts morally outraged. Not just that an old man was killed for a poem, but that the men of her city, who were supposed to be the protectors of free expression, had just gone silent.
So she spoke up.
She did. Her verses circulated, and they were sharp. They condemned the hypocrisy, the fear that was taking over.
And the response was the same deadly question.
Precisely the same. When the prophet heard her words, he asked, who will rid me of Marwan's daughter?
More specific this time.
Very specific. And a man from her own tribe, Umayr ibn Adi, who was blind, volunteered. And the details here, which are preserved in the histories of Ibn Ishaq and al-Tabari, are just. They're crucial to understanding the weight of this precedent.
Let's pause on those sources because you mentioned them before. Why is it so significant that these accounts come from Ibn Ishaq and al-Tabari? What does that mean for a modern Muslim trying to reform the faith?
It's a critical point. These aren't obscure fringe texts that Nushuz is pulling from. Ibn Ishaq's Sirat Rasul Allah is one of the earliest, most foundational biographies of the Prophet Muhammad. It's where the story comes from.
The source code, in a way.
It's the source code. And al-Tabari, a few centuries later, compiled this massive authoritative history of the world. And he relied heavily on those early accounts. So when you cite them, you are citing the bedrock of historical understanding that is accepted by mainstream Islamic scholarship. These assassinations aren't footnotes. They're embedded in the core narrative.
Which makes the details of Asma's death all the more significant.
And all the more horrific. Umayr ibn Adi found her at night, sleeping with her children. She was nursing her youngest infant.
Oh, no.
And the account explicitly states that he pulled the baby off her breast before he ran his sword through her. The baby was still crying when he left.
I don't even have words for that.
And the next morning, Umayr's nervous. He asks the Prophet if there will be repercussions, and the Prophet assures him 2 goats won't put their heads together over her.
Meaning her death was so insignificant no one would dare object.
Her blood was worthless. And Nushuz includes these graphic details for a reason. They demonstrate that silencing dissent took absolute priority over any kind of universal human compassion, even for a nursing mother. The texts themselves record this, making it impossible for modern reformers to just wish it away.
The pattern then moves up the social ladder. The next target, Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf, was a tribal chief. A big deal.
A very big deal. Half Arab, half Jewish, a man of influence and power. And because of that, his assassination required a new level of sophistication.
What was his crime?
Same as the others, really. Words. He publicly mourned the Meccans killed at Badr and wrote satirical verses about the Prophet. Again, standard practice for an Arab poet at the time. But because he was powerful and protected inside a fortress, a direct attack wasn't possible.
So it required planning. And, as Nushuz highlights, it required deception.
Yes. This is a huge turning point. The Prophet asks, "Who will rid me of Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf?" A man named Muhammad bin Maslama volunteers, but he says we'll need to lie to him. And he is explicitly given permission to do so.
Permission to lie from the Prophet himself.
Explicitly. So Maslama goes to Ka'b and pretends to be disillusioned with Islam. He complains about the taxes, the demands. He gains Ka'b's trust. He fakes being a disgruntled follower.
So this is now sanctioned espionage for the purpose of political murder.
That's exactly what it is. Ka'b is lured out of his fortress at night under false pretenses, and he's ambushed and beheaded. And when the assassins bring his head back to the Prophet, he praises Allah.
So the lesson is clear. Words are capital crimes, and the state, if you will, is now using sophisticated methods, including sanctioned deception, to carry out the sentence.
That deception, that permission to lie, creates what Nushuz calls a profound, unresolvable dilemma for modern reformers.
How so? Unpack that for us.
Well, if a modern progressive Muslim wants to argue that Islam is a religion that champions universal virtues like honesty, truthfulness, keeping your word, they run straight into the Ka'b incident. How do you square a universal prohibition on lying with the fact that the Prophet himself sanctioned it to facilitate a murder?
You can't.
You're stuck. You either have to admit that the Prophet approved of deception for political ends, which kind of undermines the whole moral purity argument, or you have to reject this foundational story as untrue, which undermines the authority of the entire tradition. It's a perfect trap.
It is. Now let's